So there is virtually nothing that a business does that doesn't cost, or an organization that doesn't cost money. Even if you think about the owner doing it themselves, it's obviously costing them in terms of the opportunity cost in terms of time. And so setting objectives is really important, and a lot of companies don't. So with regard to integrated marketing communication, I asked you to come up with, in this critical thinking challenge, reasons why, or is it possible that marketing objectives cannot, the text says marketing objectives are not exactly the same thing as IMC objectives, but given that most businesses are small and their resources are scarce, is that possible? Why or why not? So I want you all to stand up and justify your response to the critical thinking challenge. Which group wants to volunteer to go first?
We will.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, Lee said that the text marketing objectives and the IMC objectives actually go hand in hand. So we disagree that they are not equal.
Okay.
And we found out that in marketing, there is what is called ADA goals and AIDA goals, and like model stages. There's supposed to be like raise awareness, interest, desire, and action to the marketing firm and help differentiate the brand. And then IMC has SMART goals, which is like the specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time goals. And both of those are similar when taken into account.
We figured that for a small business or medium business, those goals need to be hand in hand to actually achieve anything, because you can do an ad campaign but not measure how successful it was, or measure how successful you are without doing any marketing. So we said that they need to go hand in hand.
Yeah, and then the other thing, like you said, resources are scarce, and because of that, they can't put they kind of have to put their eggs in a more exclusive basket. They can't just dabble in everything, because otherwise they're not going to be able to get the highest quality. So they can't use every medium possible because they don't have the resources to do so. So if their primary idea is we're going to use this ad to get more people in the door, like that's the marketing objective and the IMC objective is kind of how we thought of it. So we thought that they kind of had to go hand in hand in order to be, in order to work.
Okay, but if I understand your argument, basically, and this is what a lot of people think, and there's actually a professor in this department. She doesn't have a PhD in marketing, so we'll have to forgive her for that. They combined departments at one point in time. We used to have this department called General Business, which contains the business communications faculty, the statistics faculty, and the legal studies folks. And they had a big war in that department under this one department chair, and the department disintegrated, and the communications folks came over to marketing, and the lawyers went to finance, which I don't understand why they put them in finance. That makes no sense to me. Like, it would have made sense to me to put the lawyers in with the accountants, because those are both regulated professions. Like, to be an accountant, you generally have to be the CPA, right? That's what most businesses want you to have. And so that sort of makes sense to me. And there's a lot of regulation in accounting. And then the communications folks came to us, and then the statistics people went to economics, which I guess sort of makes sense, because economics has got a lot of econometrics, and so there's a lot of staff there. But there is a professor who basically thinks that all of marketing is advertising and PR. And that's not all. In fact, if you look at the history of marketing and the history of marketing thought, marketing doesn't start out as advertising and PR. Marketing starts out as what? For those of you that sort of my history of marketing, what was sort of the foundational discipline in marketing? It was logistics. It was logistics studies. It was how you get stuff from farm to market. And so if you look at marketing goals, I guess the argument would be that marketing is more than advertising and promotion. It involves logistics, which is the place component. So is it really necessary to have your logistics goals, which should be part of your overall marketing plan, as being synonymous with your IMC goals?
Yes,
Yes?
I would say yes,
Okay.
because I feel like for your logistic goals, wouldn't that go into your sample?
Well, give me a substantive example of a company that you think that the logistics goal is relevant to the advertising and integrated marketing communication goal.
Dr. Pepper?
Okay?
Dr. Pepper advertises a lot during football games, bowl games, SEC, they're huge on. And I feel like when you think of the South, it's Coke. They drink a lot of those. They don't do unhealthy. They do unhealthy habits. They drink a lot of soft drinks. They rest.
So the idea that Dr. Pepper goes anywhere and you should be able to get it anywhere should be part of the IMC goal.
I think one of the biggest things is not necessarily synonymous, but I think hand in hand is really the key phrase we're looking at. Because I mean, obviously, they're not going to have the time, they're not going to have the money or the resources to be able to put like a full plan together and be able to go all into everything. So I think IMC might be a big part of it.
Okay.
So not necessarily everything. Like you're going to have to do other things. You can't just put an ad out and call it cool. But you are going to have to look into other things too a little bit. But at the same time, that is what a lot of people and a lot of the small and mid-sized organizations, that's a good place for them to start, because awareness is going to be a big thing for them.
Okay. I guess you could also see an argument being made that logistics is important because you're going to tailor the IMC campaign to that. So for example, this is one that just comes to my head off the top of my head. Brahms. Brahms doesn't advertise in New Mexico because Brahms, what is it that makes Brahms, what's their big marketing thing that makes Brahms sort of
It's all like a one-day
Fresh.
drive from there.
yeah, it's what we call a vertically integrated company with regard to their dairy products. So they have their own cows, and apparently they're not happy cows, because happy cows come from California, and these cows are where?
Tuttle.
They're right here in Oklahoma, and so Brahms only serves an area that they can drive to within one day, so that the product is always fresh. So advertising, I guess, with regard to like the Super Bowl would be irrelevant to Brahms because it's not, I mean, you're oversaturating coverage, but advertising Brahms, they do advertise at night on News 9 and on KFOR and things like that. Okay, all right. So I guess I do too. What about with regard to price then? Is price a component of the IMC?
I can see it being considered into it.
How so?
Well, in order to market and in order to figure out how to correctly market to your target group, you need to be able to set a price.
Do most product advertisements and IMC campaigns tell you the price?
No, but they kind of communicate it in a sense. They don't necessarily explicitly come out and say, here's the price, but you can sometimes tell by the ad how they're trying to position themselves. So like, if you look at like a Mercedes, like their ads are like, they make you think classy. When you think classy, you associate a price with it.
Yeah.
So they don't come out and like necessarily give you a number, but they give you an idea or a perceived value.
I think price almost shows more of an image of the company that they're trying to perceive as not necessarily cheap or expensive, but higher quality. I know, like we were talking when you were out, like we were talking about beer. So you think of like Dos Equis, it's the most interesting man in the world. When you look at those commercials, it's like he's in not a club or tailgating, he's in a back room of a bar, curtains and stuff, and he's doing crazy
Interestingly
shit.
enough, most car commercials actually do tell you the price, don't they?
Small, yeah. At least
Well, actually, at the end, usually they say start, like Mercedes says on their C-Class, they say
Does it?
starting under, in fact, they come up with an advertisement, which I think is maybe counterintuitive to their market, which is affordable luxury. And so they tell you what their C class starts at, and they say starts under 30 or priced around 30, and then they give you a price at the end. Lots of car ads actually do that. And lots of car ads will tell you, they try to give you a monthly figure so you can figure out whether or not it will fit in with your monthly budget. They'll say smart leasing starting at, $429 a month. And then in fine print, it tells you with $5,000 down, and
Yeah.
all of the other stuff. But yeah, and they generally, the car companies actually do include price, but Dos Equis doesn't, Budweiser obviously doesn't. But I think that there's sort of a standard price that people expect to pay for this.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say, and it's kind of like that with like Dr. Pepper and Gatorades and, like things like that, I would say.
Okay.
But maybe it's just because they're like cheaper items, so people don't. I mean, like,
Even like Citizen Echo watches though, like when they advertise during like races or like sports and sporting events, they have the athlete that you're watching there. It's a white background, a clean looking watch.
Yeah.
I feel like it almost mimics like a luxury watch at an affordable price.
Yeah.
And smart.
So they use heuristics in order to get at the price of the phone.
Yeah, and I think that's what we were trying to get at is that marketing objectives and IMC objectives kind of work together because it's honestly about brand awareness, your sample, how you're communicating, and how you're analyzing what you're communicating.
All right.
And that's got to be efficient for small to mid-sized organizations, like it absolutely has to be. Otherwise, they're just going to think marketing is another cost.
yeah,
Yeah, that's true. All right, very good. Which group wants to go next? You guys want to go next?
We're covered.
It's the best way to do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, Prestige Worldwide, that's what it is. Our group is
Prestige Worldwide.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot for a second.
why?
Yeah. All right, so we said that small businesses or small to medium-sized businesses can make a distinction between test marketing objectives and IMC objectives. And I mean, this is also a personal opinion. I didn't do 100% research in 15 minutes, but I said they can tell the difference, or they can just make it distinct by using IMC concepts to advance their basic marketing objectives. They may not get the 100% of the IMC and 100% of our basic marketing objectives, but if they use IMC to advance their original marketing plan, I think they can just make a distinction and make a good investment. I understand since it's a small to medium-sized business, they don't have capital or the funds to invest a whole lot of money in, but if their base marketing plan is solid and they use IMC to really tie it in with their communications, that they could really make a difference in their revenue and bringing revenue into their company. So the resources to establish the objectives and their marketing plan may be like a hefty investment, but I think it'd be a great return on investment. I think our 3 examples, I was only using like local Oklahoma stuff because I don't know a lot of other small businesses throughout the country, but specifically like boutiques and art district shops, they use a lot of social media marketing and targeted ads through Google ads and stuff like that. But specifically like Facebook, that say Lush Boutique off of, I think it's Penn. Yeah, they use a lot of social media marketing. They use social media influencers that go to our local colleges. So they have models that go to our colleges that have their own little marketing campaigns that go back to their thing and go back to their page. And then Facebook also separates us by denomination, or not denomination, demographics. So our age, most people that shop at Lush are most likely be female. So they can target you better by using like a general marketing plan, but using IMC and communicating with their models on campus that tell us where to shop and putting on their Instagram stories. That's a really effective technique for them. The second, I have food trucks. So, at Blue Garden, our food trucks, and I think it's Hudson at 8th Festival in June. They use a lot of geofencing and surveys. If you use the app to get food at their stuff, there's a quick survey. So I think that's a really good additional tool to their original marketing plan, which is probably just to, I don't want to say they're only targeting young people because it's not only young people, but they probably have like their set population that are more likely to eat there, more likely to use the app to order their food and take the survey. And then finally, I had Paycom, because Paycom's they're a bigger business now, but when they started out, they weren't. They started out here in 1998, really small, and they did I know they had to do a lot of cold calls. They had to start investing a lot. Recently, they started investing in a lot of like public interests. So it's time for their marketing campaign to get their name out there. They invested in like the art walls at the plaza, so they have like a whole like back alley of murals that they've invested in. And then I think it was last spring they had a Harry Potter festival at the Science Museum of Oklahoma, and that was thousands and thousands of dollars for them. And it was sold out tickets the first day they were sold. So I think by adding geofencing and surveys, online social media marketing, and all these other tools that can really enhance their original marketing strategy.
So I like your examples. I mean, I like the fact that you use real substantive examples. Let's talk about our districts.
Okay.
A lot of those districts now they've got some sort of organization that is sort of a umbrella for the businesses in the area. So for example, the Paseo artists have an organization that puts on the Paseo Arts Festival every year, and I don't know if they have a full-time executive director or not. I don't think they do. I think they
social
have.
media or their like actual organization.
They actually have an organization.
Yeah, they have an executive director.
The Paseo does?
The Paseo does. They have like a board of directors.
They actually have an executive director for the Paseo Arts District.
No, they have like the Paseo, like so the Allied Arts, and then there's the Paseo, and then there's like Midtown, and they all have, mostly because I always had an internship with them, so that's why I know that.
Okay,
They have.
I know that like Positively Paseo, which is an organization that operates in Paseo that builds houses, has got an executive director and stuff
I
like
think
that.
it's
I've
the
never
Paseo
heard
Arts
of them, by the way.
Association.
For Positively Paseo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and their new website's about to launch.
Wow. Okay, so you know Robert Lang.
Yeah, he's on our board of directors. Yeah,
he's
Cheryl
the-
Lovelady's our director. by
He's
the way.
the president. Do most of those EDs of those small districts you think they've even heard the term integrated marketing communication?
Not possible.
Yeah, I'm thinking I knew the last executive director of Positively Paseo,
Oh, no.
and she was a lovely woman,
She was great.
but
Okay.
I would venture to guess she'd never even heard the term. And there's a good reason for that, which was her specialty was in dealing with the city and building homes, not in necessarily engaging in marketing.
Well, the position I'm in is new. It literally started last year about when they started their marketing, because they're having a hard time selling houses that are below market rate because people didn't understand that, it's a different.
So
It's
No.
it's a nonprofit, so. it's
so with the art district, I mean, I think, I don't even know if they know what marketing IMC is for some of them. What about the food trucks? My impression of people who have food trucks is that it's sort of an interesting fad that's a phenomenon. 10 years ago, I would go around my classes and I would say, why did you take this marketing class? And students would say, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I'd say, what business do you want to start? And I want to do cupcakes.
Oh,
And I would think, how many cupcake places can we have? Like, I mean, how many
But I feel
cupcake?
like that's with everything. I know.
But, okay,
Just personally, I'm like, everybody wants to own their own business. And
Right.
when people ask me, I'm like, well, I haven't found exactly what I want to do, but I feel like at one point, a person will find it, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be successful.
Right, yeah, and food, I mean, like, food
real
trucks
quick on
are,
the cupcake thing though, there's like 11 chicken places in Edmond alone.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want to start a business, chicken.
I wonder if the food truck thing is sort of a fad, like, everybody's starting a food truck, and they think they're gonna make a lot of money, and I don't know, I mean, maybe they will.
Which some of
But-
them do, like the donut trucks, that you see those,
Yeah,
I
chicken
know those
express
make
and
a lot of
chicken
money.
No, they don't.
Really?
I feel like I go anywhere.
I mean, this is one of those deals, so I
And
have
that's not
this.
even adding like KFC.
I own a snow cone stand in Guthrie, and the way I got this snow cone stand was, I own this lot in downtown Guthrie. And the people who own the snow cone, they rented this lot from me and they put their snow cone stand. And then they didn't pay their rent. So I had to foreclose on the snow cone stand. So I got the snow cone stand, and I've gone through a series of tenants in the snow cone stand that people have rented for me. And when these people started out, I thought, wow, that's a really, this is the business to be in, because they're charging like $1, and this was 20 years ago. They're charging $1.50 to $2.50 for basically ice and sugar water. But the margin on that is huge, like the profit. But when you start figuring out how many snow cones you have to sell to make $30,000, that's a hell of a lot of snow cones you have to sell. And the only time snow cones sell is really what? From about May to about September. And even in September, once school starts, snow cone sales go way down. So I don't know. I'm willing to bet that most people who start these food trucks have never heard of IMC. And therefore, I'm not sure that they have marketing objectives.
Well, they just use social media as their marketing.
Well, I mean, a lot of people are getting these crash courses online, like you said, YouTube, like, there's people I know that have like a small business, like they didn't know anything about marketing, and then they start all of a sudden using YouTube and
Dave Ramsey.
probably watching your videos, honestly.
Okay, all right. Yeah, you can learn all kinds of stuff online.
Do you
Like
sell
$1,000
smoothies or
for
hot
this
cocoa at
YouTube,
your
like,
snow
of
cone
course,
stand?
never used it.
I don't know what the current guy does with it.
Do you make the snow cones?
Do I what?
Do you make the snow cones?
Yeah, they're like, they get the machine, the shape, it's.
No, do you
line.
make the snow cones?
No.
They're his tenants.
Are
He just pulls by and gets the free ones.
you crazy? No, I don't have time for that. When they first opened, yeah, I learned how to make stuff, but I thought this is a great job, it's mindless, you pump out
Yeah.
cell phones all day long, that's great, but
Your hands are
I don't have
tied.
time for that.
I feel like every class I come in here and I learn about something else that you have or
Yeah.
not.
Oh, yeah,
I'm like,
How many pages is your resume?
Oh, I don't know.
38?
Yes.
Okay, business idea, my friend owns a
That's
snow
the
cone
cut down
stand,
version.
in the winter, she sells hot chocolate.
Chocolate,
Yeah.
And all
yeah.
that stuff, and she has the ice rink in Mitch Park, so she like drags her snow cone stand down there.
Right.
And every day, the kids are like, you have snow cones? And she's like, no, I have my hot chocolate, because
Right.
it's December.
Yeah.
Like,
I
snow
saw
cone
people
and December don't go together.
There's it used to be a snow cone truck only that was in Shawnee, my hometown, and they would go to like different parking lots every day, basically. And you could follow them on social media and,
Oh, that's
Katie Bug did that.
Yeah,
But
but
yeah,
now they're like,
Looks good.
they totally evolved into this whole other business. Like, yeah, so it started out snow cones and now it's like this full blown like, they think they're like so hipster like coffee, but they also have snow cones too. So you can go in, you can get like this healthy smoothie that's like got, what's that Herbalife, the Herbalife drink?
What's the name? I feel like I know this.
Is it Euphoria, I think?
Pyramids.
Yeah, seriously. But you
All
can
right.
get Herbalife
Well-
drinks there, you can get smoothies, you can get, how can you fit all that into this tiny little?
Right, but they're busy
But they
making
make a lot,
products.
yeah, they make.
They're
they do
busy, I
really
mean, my
good.
point is, that they're busy working on their product development, not necessarily on IMC, and I feel like that's most small business. All right, we got one more group to go. So very good arguments, not sure buying, but we'll see.
Well, the basis of our argument was sort of that, so now I'm sort of sad.
Okay, go
But it
ahead.
was basically that marketing and IMC objectives are not the same, like they have different end goals, but usually in small to mid-sized businesses, like the distinction isn't there because they don't know about it, or they just, like, they generally don't have the knowledge of like, this is separate to them, it's probably just like a whole spectrum of like, this is like just the regular marketing and it evolves into IMC and they just don't realize it. That was sort of like the distinction that we thought of. And then also, that they don't have the resources to make like a huge, they don't have a department, like a separate department. You know, like we said, cost-wise, like they're thinking it's an expense and not an investment. And as a small to mid-sized business, they don't have the proper funds or finances to be like, we're gonna make a huge investment in, you know, advertisements, communication, all costs money that we don't think costs, and most people do use social media, you know, targeted ads, and sort of just see how it goes because that's the trend these days. And then we also said, not that they're synonymous, but they're done simultaneously. And like I said, it's sort of a timeline, so it's sort of intertwines words, and they just don't realize that that's what they're doing. So the distinction isn't really there, but the differences are.
Okay, so I think I think that point that you made there is one of the most prominent, which is that we, as classes and as academics, we talk about these as though they are distinct silos, like there is integrated marketing communication, there is product development, and most small businesses, and actually most businesses, don't operate that way. They just sort of think of it as running the business, right? And so it's not like you can parse out. I mean, I would venture to guess that in my mother's schedule, I don't venture to guess. I know she doesn't sit there and say, she's got a son who's a marketing professor, and I know with regard to our business, she doesn't say, I'm gonna work on my IMC goals, right? For this 30 minutes today. We basically do the whole business ourselves, and you sort of work on things in a holistic manner. You look at what's working and you focus on that which you don't. And I would venture to guess that most people, as you suggest, most small businesses, think of marketing as just being advertising and promotion, or just advertising. They may not, they don't even understand promotion. So they're thinking about, how do I make it pretty? For example, with food trucks, how do I make an attractive sign that catches people's eye, that brings them to my food truck? What is it, that will bring people to my food as opposed to others? Well, how are you gonna do that? Well, a lot of it is you may be having representations on the side of your truck of what it is that you're selling. If you go to the fair, there's all these, pictures on the food trucks of what they, with the deep fat fried chocolate covered butter looks like.
Fried Oreos.
I hate the
Fried
state fair.
So-
I'm gonna stop.
Fried Oreos
I
are
think
great.
that's right. I don't think that people, I think a lot of businesses would have a hard time even defining, sort of what their goals are beyond making sales.
Yeah.
Like, I want to sell my product, I don't think most people, one of the reasons I've gone through a succession of tenants in my snow cone stand is that everybody sort of thinks about it the way I did initially before they think about it in depth, which is, that's a heck of a markup there on some shaved ice and some sugar water that's really cheap, right? Really cheap to make, but they don't think about, like, how many friggin' snow cones am I gonna have to sell? There was one business in Guthrie that did do this. The guy owned the donut shop forever and ever. We had 2 donut shops, and one of them was owned by a guy who decided he wanted to make $30,000 a year and no more, and so he figured out how many donuts he had to sell every day to do that, and he opened the donut shop at 5 a.m., and if the donuts were gone by 6, he was gone for that day. If the donuts lasted till noon, he stayed there till that last donut was sold.
Were they good donuts?
No.
Not gonna
No,
afford
I
to
mean,
do that.
He's no longer in business. So,
I was like, maybe it's some kind of prestigious, like.
I think there are a lot of people that
The
think,
Rolex
I would like to own
donuts.
business. So I think that's right. I think that your observation there is really important, in that most small business owners, it's not like they set aside and they think, this is what I'm gonna do. It's just, what do I have to do today?
Yeah.
And how do I increase sales?
Yeah.
And that those sales, they don't distinguish. They know that they're gonna have to advertise in order to increase sales, and they don't necessarily think of those as distinct and separate from the rest of the business. So I think that's one of the things that we have to think about.
Yeah, one of my friends owns a CBD shop, and it's not a part of like the CBD Plus franchise. And so I know that he does obviously a lot of, like we're saying, marketing and advertising through like Instagram and stuff, but I doubt it that he looks at it like that.
I'm sure he
maybe
doesn't.
He probably doesn't even get on there to see who's clicking on the ad to, what I mean? He's coming in and he's like, oh, well, I'm getting sales, but it's, you never know. It's hard to think. A lot of smaller companies might not know that.
I also think with CBD, with it being kind of like new, kind of like a fad thing right now, I think he's not thinking about it as much. He's thinking the money's coming in, so why do I need to worry about it?
Exactly.
Which
Well, I don't know if the projector's gonna come back, but, so hopefully it'll come back on. The value of having objectives. So I made an argument, and we talked about this in our discussion, that
It's on.
it's on, okay. All right, that a lot of organizations don't necessarily even establish objectives. So what are the values of actually having objectives? Many organizations don't see a lot of value in having objectives because they're just trying to survive. They're in survival mode. They're just trying to sell their snow cones or whatever it is that they have, their food truck products. And then, even if they do see the value in establishing objectives, and of course, one of the things that we can say about this, that we know, that you can make this personal, and one of the things I try to do is to say you should make these things personal to yourself. One of the things we know is that people who have clearly defined goals and objectives for themselves and that they write those down are more likely to succeed than those that don't. What constitutes a good goal or a good objective? I oftentimes think about, you should think about this from your own personal perspective. Why is that stupid thing not working? Oh, we lost all of them.
No, not that one.
Oh, you're good. Come on, turn on. What constitutes a good goal or objective for you? Well, I think one of the things that we know is that you're more likely to get a good job if you have a college education than not. We know that people with college degrees earn, on average, considerably, millions of dollars more than those that don't. And by the way, new studies suggest that business degrees actually earn the highest, at least starting out. Now, that's not necessarily true over the long haul. And you'll find that a lot of presidents of Fortune 500 companies actually have their bachelor's degree in a liberal arts field. So, but at least initially, business degrees tend to earn more starting out than other degrees. So what's a good goal for yourself? Well, I want to graduate with a business degree in marketing rather than just the general business, and I want to do it in 4 years. That's a good goal. But a lot of companies, because they're just, again, facing, everyday challenges, see no value in defining their objectives when they probably should. And then if they can see value in it, if you have a bigger organization where you actually might have like a director of marketing communication and market, sales VPs and stuff like that, there may be disagreement about what the objectives should be. So the company that I work for, the American Education Corporation, we had 3 vice presidents of sales and marketing based on 3 different regions of the country. And then we had a marketing communications director. And what that marketing communications director's idea of what the goals should be differed radically from the sales VPs, because the sales VPs were worried about what? How is this going to increase my sales? Like their whole compensation plan was tied to, their whole variable comp plan was tied to what? How much am I selling? And so there was often a disagreement as to what the objectives should be. But there is value in having integrated marketing communication objectives. And that's that one is that it allows you to coordinate among various groups working on the Inc campaign. So the company that I worked for, we didn't do television advertising because it wouldn't have been any benefit to us. But we did have an integrated marketing campaign in terms of, we had trade shows, we advertised in educational journals and educational trade publications. And so we wanted to make sure that we were speaking with a consistent voice among those various touch points that we had with our consumer. So it serves as a way to coordinate all of those various types of services. And when we would go out and we would deal with, for example, the people that did our trade show booth, it was important that we have those integrated ideas so that they would understand in building and designing the trade show what it was that we were wanting to say. It serves as a guide for decision-making, your objectives, and it provides a way to determine whether or not you succeeded or failed. So going back to, again, the personal example about I want to graduate with a degree in marketing from the University of Central Oklahoma within 4 years, if you have those specifics, you can then see whether or not you met those goals. How are you progressing? How are you going to monitor that from an individual perspective? Well, if you want to graduate in 4 years, you can't, what's full-time status? What's considered a full-time student?
12 hours.
12 hours. Can you graduate taking 12 hours a semester? You can't. So you got to be able to, if I want to graduate on time, you got to look at how many hours you got to take per semester, and then whether or not you're meeting those goals and objectives. And businesses likewise can see whether or not their campaigns are coming together and they're meeting the goals and objectives of the integrated marketing communication program. So determining, my clicker is not working. Once again, it's great. Determining the IMC objectives. So your marketing objectives are the overall marketing program, and that's one of the things that I think was brought out by the discussion that we had, that your overall marketing is going to include things like logistics, price, which may not be part necessarily of specific IMC objectives, your product development, things like that. So it's going to be a broader, and then IMC will look at overall how you're going to accomplish what you want with your marketing, integrated marketing communication over a period of time. So it's based on particular tasks that you want to set to establish and deliver your message. And as I think you all pointed out, it does have to integrate, again, with those other functions. So even though we think about these things as silos and distinct in terms of theoretical perspectives, it does have to integrate with your overall marketing goals. So you translate your general marketing goals into specifics for IMC, and those should coordinate with the overall objective of the company. If your overall objective is to sell airplanes like Boeing does, Boeing doesn't do a whole lot of television advertising. Why? For their airplanes. Airbus actually does, which is kind of unusual.
Because most of their viewers will be watching television.
Yeah, most of the people who buys airplanes. There are two types of people that buy airplanes from Boeing. Governments, not people, but organizations. Governments and
Other airline companies.
airlines, and who else buys airplanes? There's another big third category. Well, rich people like Donald Trump has his own airplane, but they generally don't buy a whole lot of them. What's the other big category that buys airplanes? Shipping.
I'll think of the cartel.
No, not drug dealers. Shipping companies are the other big category that buy large. UPS, FedEx. Sales versus communication objectives. Most managers, and again, small businesses in particular, equate the promotional objectives with a return on investment. And your text tells you some of the problems with doing that. Now, again, if you are a small business, a small to mid-sized business, and you're making this investment, a lot of small businesses are going to have to see a return on their investment fairly quickly. Why is that? Because if they don't, they're probably not going to be in business for very long. Most small businesses fail within what time period?
5 years.
The first 5 years, the vast majority of them. Your text gives you a nice analogy, I think, and they talk about one of the problems with using sales objectives in evaluating your IMC program. And again, this is if you have a big enough business that you can sort of engage in this kind of analysis, is that they use the quarterback analogy, and I think that was kind of an interesting analogy. Although if you are an OU football fan, because they tend to be, and I went to OU, my brother went to OSU, and I hate OU as a result of having gone there, so I slam OU often. But OU fans tend to be enormously fickle, and if they lose, OU Texas is coming up, isn't it? What is it, OU Texas this weekend?
Yep.
When they lose, if they lose to Texas, who are they going to blame? They're going to blame the coach.
Well, I feel like they blame the refs for this.
They blame the coach. Every time OU loses, they have a tendency to start calling, particularly if they lose to Texas or if they lose to OSU, they start calling for the head of the coach. Your text used the quarterback analogy. The quarterback is an enormously important player on the field, but he's not the only player in the field. And so IMC, if you use sales as your objective, well, IMC is only one component. Why else may your company fail? And I will tell you this, I have seen lots of companies fail that had great trademarks, that had fantastic ad campaigns, and they failed because they had crappy products. I think Wendy's in the past was one of the most creative advertising companies in terms of the fast food. They had this great ad campaign years ago when I was a kid growing up called Where's the Beef? And it was funny. I mean, it was funny and it made a point, and I think it delivered a selling message. And Wendy's is still not really all that big a competitor with McDonald's. And so if you're just relying on that one ad as your overall, the reason why your company is not succeeding, well, you need to look at other parts of the equation. The second problem is that promotional effects often occur over time and have carryover effects. There's something called the 3 exposure hypothesis, that people have to be exposed to something 3 times before they get it. And even then, maybe they don't. Maybe you're not a prospective customer for a business today, but you might be in the future. Historically speaking, my business in Guthrie, we do murder mystery weekends, and that's sort of historically been out of the price range of most college-age students. So when we engage in advertising and look at our marketing communication, we're not generally targeting it towards college students, but when they graduate, they are the target. There are times when sales measures are appropriate. If you have, for example, direct response, obviously you want, if you're doing a direct promotional type ad, coupons in the daily newspaper, you're trying to get direct response to that. If you are putting things on special, how many of you have a company's app and look for the specials that the company offers on your app? Obviously, that's part of integrated marketing communication, and you want a direct response to that. You're offering this as a special, and you want a direct response. Special events and sales. So examples are like Labor Day sales. All kinds of companies advertise for President's Day sale. That's a huge day to sell what? Cars, and also mattresses for some reason. They sell a lot of mattresses on President's Day sales, Labor Day sales. Yeah, they have historically sold cars on President's Day. It used to be that, now President's Day has become less popular because we've replaced it as a paid holiday with in most places, except places like Arizona, which refuse to acknowledge it. What do most people get off for instead of President's Day now? You still get off from Memorial and Labor Day. Those are big sales days as well. But President's Day was a big one. It's been replaced by MLK Day. So those kinds of sales, obviously you advertise and you have a Memorial Day sale or a Labor Day sale or a MLK sale or whatever, and you obviously want direct response. The other,
car sales in his name.
I actually don't think they do. I've never heard of MLK Day sales.
Okay, that was like.
But they used to do, President's Day was a big day. And the idea was that people were off that day and so they could go shop. And so you obviously want to see some movement as a result of your advertising. Also, if advertising is the dominant role in your marketing program, if you're relying almost exclusively on advertising to drive sales. If you have a bigger company, particularly these problems with just are recognized. So for example, with regard to products like Ford or GM trucks, it's not just that you're trying to drive sales with your advertising, you're also trying to do more than that. Achieve brand knowledge and interest. One of the things that Ford did is, as the emission standards became more stringent and companies that built cars and trucks were required to increase their miles per gallon across their fleet line, they had to abandon, in many instances, some of their fleet products in order to get the average across the line in compliance with the EPA's emission standards. So there have been several, and I have suffered as a result of this. For example, Honda did away with my mother, and I am driving my mother's car today because my car's in the shop. My mother has a Honda Element, and she absolutely loves that car. They did away with the Element. Why did they do away with the Element? Anybody know? It had about the same miles per gallon. The Element, although it's a small car and it's a light car, it gets horrible miles per gallon. Anybody know why? It's an all-wheel drive vehicle. And anything that's always in four-wheel drive generally decreases your miles per gallon, as I understand. But that's one of the ones that they did away with. Honda had to make a choice as to what they wanted to carry. And so what did they decide to keep instead of the Honda Element? The CR-V. Ford, likewise, with their trucks, in order to try and lower their average, what did they do? They are cutting all their cars. That's not a result of the MPGs, but as a result of the fact that we no longer have expensive gas prices, and that's become more popular. But even having said that, they still have to achieve the average, although the Trump administration is trying to roll back the EPA guidelines on that. What did Ford do to try and increase the miles per gallon of their trucks? They introduced the EcoBoost, which is a new brand. So they did that. They also introduced the all aluminum body. So they did away with the steel body. And so you want to, when they came out with the EcoBoost, what are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to achieve brand knowledge and interest in the EcoBoost. And the other thing that they had was the Flex Fuel and their little leaf icon that they have. Create favorable attitudes. What does Ford do? Why do they constantly reinforce the idea that the F-150 is the #1 selling truck for 30 years in a row? Well, they want to create a favorable attitude and image, and then obviously influence the purchasing intentions of truck buyers.
Built Ford tough.
Built Ford tough.
Okay, I think I heard about this last time, but why is every month check month?
What's that?
Every month is check month.
Every month is truck month.
And
I don't think every month is truck month.
I see this
Every other
commercials.
month's truck month.
Okay,
I
I
don't
see
think every-
commercials for that all the time.
I
And then,
thought October was truck month, but I may be wrong.
okay, I feel like I see those year round. And then when I was a
That's 'cause
kid,
it's
I
this
thought Oklahoma was special because they did like a personalized Oklahoma Ford truck month. And then I was in Texas one time, they had Texas Ford truck month.
They do have
And
they
I
have
was kind of mad.
Oklahoma
That
models.
was salty.
They do release sort of, and there are certain tax advantages usually with having like the Oklahoma edition or the Texas edition. So your text talks about the communication objectives and the pyramid structure. Lower levels lead to higher levels. So you have to build on a base. At the base, 90% building on this is to create awareness. After you created awareness, then get the consumer to have actual knowledge, comprehension. So what is it that Ford does with their advertisements on their trucks? Well, they keep awareness by telling you, by having those advertisements, built Ford tough, Ford the #1 selling truck brand 30 years in a row. Then they build knowledge and comprehension, best in class towing capacity, getting people to like it and then to prefer it, to try the product, and then to repurchase. What are car companies trying to do? A lot of times there is not a big difference, particularly like with regard to the Ford F-150, the Dodge 1500, the Chevy 1500, the GM Sierra. There's not a big difference between those. So what are you trying to do? You're trying to maintain, and people have a tendency to be somewhat brand loyal in that market. So when you buy a new truck, you buy Ford. As the result of the fact that cars have gone up, because of these technology requirements to meet the EPA emission standards and the safety requirements that have been imposed, the average cost of a car is well over for the average car is over $30,000, which means that the average car on the road now is how old? According to the National Transportation Safety.
8 years.
Six.
10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, the average car is now 10 years old in the United States. Problems with communication objectives. often, a lot of times managers say that the objectives, the communications objectives are too difficult to translate into sales goals. Again, if you're only focused on sales, you can see where that might be a problem because it's hard to predict on a one-for-one basis whether or not you are increasing sales. And trying to translate those communications objectives can be difficult to determine adequate levels of knowledge. How do you determine whether or not people have an awareness? Obviously, with big brands like Ford, Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, almost everybody has an awareness of them. Most people have some knowledge. But with lesser known brands, how do you determine levels of awareness? And particularly for those small to mid-sized companies, how are they going to measure these? Can they engage in sophisticated analysis? Well, I would argue that companies can. One of the things you can do is, for example, in my company, we ask every single person who books with us, where did you hear about us? And we track those figures.
Are they usually accurate?
They're pretty accurate. I mean, we normally track, how people book. Now, if you do a lot of online booking, it may be more difficult to track how they actually became aware of it, although a lot of people will tell you. How do you measure liking, preference, and then how do you measure conviction? So the Dagmar approach, define advertising goals for measured advertising results. Again, you want your communication task to be specific and measurable. So again, good goals are what?
Specific,
Specific,
measurable.
measurable. They should also be realistic is one of the things that I
I
say.
think specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based.
Communication tasks are based on the hierarchical model, making the consumer, so when they release new consumer packaged goods, for example, making consumers aware of the brand, getting comprehension of the brand and the product and what it will do, developing a mental disposition to buy the product, conviction, and then actually getting the consumer to take action and purchase the product. So again, they should be concrete, measurable. More specific to Dagmar, the text tells you it should have a specific target audience. So let's look at an ad and see if you think this one meets that criterion. And this is
On lazy days when it's chilly, turning up the heat costs money, and wrestling with blankets is silly. This one's too big, that one's too small, and a blanket can't cover it all. You don't stay warm, you need for a So one piece, lie around, lounge around, full body lazy wear that covers you from head to toe in soft, warm fleece. Just slip it in, zip it, and get lazy. Now you're toasty warm from head to toe, and your hands and feet stay free. So you can talk on the phone, enjoy a good book, do homework, or just do nothing at all. Wherever lazy's made of ultra soft, breathable fleece, and it's oversized for that baggy, comfortable, lazy, and perfect pajama feeling you love. Party it up with friends, or enjoy some downtime with pets, and do it all while staying warm, comfortable, and lazy. Forever Lazy comes in 4 stylish colors in sizes to fit everyone in the family, so you can all watch the big game together while Dad does what he does best. Whether you're reading the fringe during a commercial break or cramming for a college exam, Forever Lazy keeps you comfy cozy with a drawstring hoodie to keep the chilly weather away. Forever Lazy is the best thing seen on
That's good work.
Does it have a butt flap?
Uh-oh, gotta go? No worries.
Oh, it sure does.
Sure does. So onesie.
Footies. But wait, there's more. You can get some footies. Order now. This is crazy. We've always done that. You gotta wait till this is crazy.
I'm sure you get the pillow, the socks, and the onesie for $19.95. Okay, tailgating, and then what's else?
I really like Party with Friends. That was probably my
Cocktails
favorite.
on the patio.
I am gonna tell you, if you all show up in class and you forever lazy, I'm gonna have you committed.
Oh.
Just, you know,
I'll do it.
we can have you put in for observation for 72 hours by calling the sheriff's department and saying, I think you're a danger to yourself or others. And so if you do that, I mean, I love this because who the hell is the target audience there? I mean, apparently everybody needs to wear a forever lazy. I mean, the only thing that they didn't say is it's great for those unexpected court appearances that you have to have as an attorney. Specific time period. I guess I'm out of time, so we will finish this and move on to the next chapter 8 on Thursday.
Y'all don't remember when Snuggies were?
I was gonna say.
Those are
like a snug.
extremely successful.
Snuggies are just like a backwards rope.
But I love Snuggies.